All right, boys, it's game day. Let's go. Let's go. Big game. Got a big game today. My package has arrived. Oh, sweet. Nice. Score! Great win, fellas. What game's next? G-Men are having a great year. Let's go blue! Here we go. Prime time football. Texans, Dolphins. Let's do this. Yes! Review. Yes! Yes!
Heartland Flags. Every sport, every team, every flag.
Every team?
That's right.
Fine. I'll get a Washington flag too.
Find your flag and so much more with fast, free shipping. Heartlandflags.com. Every sport, every team, every flag. Almost.
Heartland Flags and Gifts presents Legends and Listeners with Scott Dochterman and Chad Leistikow. Fly 'em high and fly 'em proud. Find your flag at heartlandflags.com. Breaking down the Big Ten from the Channel Seed Studios, this is Iowa Everywhere.
Hey, Hawkeye fans, Big Ten fans, and Iowans everywhere. Welcome into the Channel Seed Studios for episode 18 of Legends and Listeners here on the Iowa Everywhere Network. Chad Leistikow here of the Des Moines Register, along with the esteemed Scott Dochterman of The Athletic. Scott, we've been doing this together now for about 4 months. Cannot really imagine a more eventful 4 months of content, and thankful for Iowa Everywhere for bringing us together in this platform. We started around the time of Cade McNamara's open practice injury, and boy, a lot has happened since then, has it not? And we've made it to the silly season in college football, and there's still plenty of drama we can talk about today.
Yeah, you're right on here, Chad. I mean, thinking back to that opening day practice or the kids' day practice, and I'm like, oh man, we've already had enough drama for this year, haven't we? With the gambling stuff, with realignment, with the drive for 325, and now we've got this. And little did we know that it would actually become more eventful during the course of the season when it came to things like that. And here we are on the eve of, within 2 weeks of Christmas, and it never seems to stop.
Yeah, I mean, the invalid fair catch, the drive to the Big Ten championship game, all the injuries, the Brian Ferentz firing. I mean, it's we've been over and over, but it really is. It has been like an unprecedented type of season to cover. And guess what? We got more to talk about today. But before we start, Scott, I want to remind folks that Legends and Listeners is brought to you every week by Heartland Flags and Gifts, which offers free shipping anywhere in the U.S. and always has fresh products, nearly every sport, every team, and every flag. Visit our good friends online at heartlandflags.com or in store at 3719 Southwest 9th Street in Des Moines. What do we got tonight on the NFL? Raiders Chargers with a bunch of backup. We got a former Big Ten quarterback and a former North Dakota State quarterback dueling it out tonight, right?
And both of them had beaten Iowa.
Oh, no, that's right.
Easton Stick did in 16, and Aiden O'Connell has, at least when they were number 2 in the country. So, but right. Either way, there's, what a perfect time to load up on a flag. We got with free shipping this time of year. Get that uncle, dad, son in your life.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, good. But the potential NFL MVP never beat Iowa, by the way. Brock Purdy. Yeah. After all the drama, Scott, we've kind of hit I don't want to say a pause in Hawkeye football, but there is a little bit of a lull here between the Big Ten Championship and the Citrus Bowl. There's certainly a lot going on behind the scenes, but it's really sort of a wait and see type of mode, I guess. How would you describe what we're dealing with right now in Hawkeye news?
It's like colic for a baby. We got a bunch of gas bubbles right now, and none of them want to come out, and we got a stomach ache. There's just we've got so much going on, but there's nothing to really report that's got any kind of meat or anything behind it. It's just a bunch of bubbles. So, whether it's the OC and, I made my way to the airport last night, Chad, and waited and didn't see anybody. So I didn't put it out on Twitter or didn't write about it, And so went there, and then the portal and how many scholarships are available now to how many people. I mean, we're just kind of paralyzed waiting for this, and none of us dare take a day off because that could be the day that we've got news coming out of our ears.
Exactly. One thing we will get to some offensive coordinator discussion later, but I wanted to start us off, and we agreed we would start here. A piece you wrote in The Athletic this week, kind of about the roster squeeze with Hawkeye football right now. Hawkeyes are up against it in scholarships. They really, don't have a lot of exits in the portal. I mean, everyone, knows the names that are leaving, Deontay Vines, Ontario Thompson, Joe Labus, Brendan Diaz-Fernandez, but that's it pretty much of scholarship guys. So they're pretty full, Scott, and there's no portal incoming movement because the priority is retaining potentially 5th and 6th year guys that have NFL decisions, or maybe even 4th year guys, or maybe even 3rd year guys. But so let's kind of start there. Where do you want to start? Because you maybe give a little quick recap of what you wrote about. Hopefully folks read it at The Athletic. But you've got the count at 84 scholarships before we get into decision time. Now, there are some big names that certainly could peel off that 84 and lower that number, but it is you only get 85. So how would you kind of frame where things stand as Iowa, is in a really pivotal roster crafting time?
Yeah, and once Australian punter signs, and he'll actually be on campus in we just don't know his name yet, in January, then it's full. So that's kind of a scary part for Iowa, is to look at where do things stand. And I mean, I think let's start kind of with the big picture, and that is once punter, his name is on paper tomorrow or next week, I should say, then there are 21 players coming in. That fills them to 85 scholarships. They have 9 players that either have the potential for an extra year or could obtain a waiver for next year. Now, this does not include the 85 does include, I should say, Luke Lachey and Cooper DeJean, who have NFL decisions to make. And so maybe that peels off a couple of numbers there. But really, when you're looking at the 9, you've got to prioritize them. You can't. It's just not going to be a situation where everybody's going to get a scholarship because they want it. It's because you've got to figure out what's available and take advantage of it. And I mean, I don't know where I would start. I would start with 1A and 1B to me, which is Nick Jackson and Sebastian Castro. I mean, I think if they want to come back, you make sure they come back. You'll find whatever way you want to. And then after that, I think Jamari Harris and maybe Eric All would be in that close to next tier category. And then there's Nick Jackson, who could obtain a waiver potentially from the NCAA for losing the last couple of games of his, Virginia final season 2 years ago because of that horrific shooting there. And then there are others like Quinn Schulte's a 2-year starter. Kyler Fisher was a part-time starter and a sub-package guy. On offense, you have Nick DeYoung, who played a lot and started a lot of games. And finally, Dejon Parker, who never really got to see much action, but, still has that extra year. So you look at all those guys, Chad, and you look at the spots. I mean, right now that would be 94 players. So you're going to lose some guys here out of this.
Yeah, I think just to clarify, initially off the top, you said Nick Jackson, you said him again. So I assume we're talking about Jay Higgins. We're talking about Jay Higgins. Yeah. Jay Higgins is in the 1 and 1A Cambridge. That's okay. Yeah. So just so folks listening, watching this understand, Higgins, all those, Higgins, Castro, those types of guys are not in the 85. So you have to add a scholarship to bring one of them back, or an Eric All, something like that. I think that's we talked a lot about that a little bit on Hawk Central last night. But I think you're spot on there because you have to start with Jay Higgins You have to kind of take, if you're Iowa coaches or Tyler Barnes or Kirk Ferentz, whoever is, managing the numbers here, you got to start with the best players. So, if Jay Higgins comes back, like, well, sorry, Nick Jackson, maybe even as good as he is, maybe you don't quite have room for him. Now I've heard that's kind of a real long shot, but still it's worth mentioning that he could maybe get that waiver. And then, below that at linebacker, Kyler Fisher, like you said, and that's no offense to those players. You just don't have we're not saying anything about those players quality wise, but you have to start with Jay Higgins, your second team All-American. And first team All Big Ten linebacker, potentially in the Citrus Bowl could set Iowa's tackles record if he has a big game, which is, almost unthinkable. Considering the 1970s, although the Hawkeyes played a lot like those 1970s Hawkeyes teams this year. Yeah. Where cheering for first downs was kind of the what happened at Kinnick Stadium way back when. But wow, we're getting like pre-Kirk Ferentz here, 81 references. We're going back to the 70s. I think back to 1976. Anyway, so yeah, like Higgins, is your priority, and then Castro would be my number one outside of DeJean, of course. But I would say that's a pretty, I don't know, maybe a 15% chance he comes back at best. I think 20. What would you say?
50-50.
50-50. Okay.
Yeah, I do. At least last time I talked to him, he was really unsure about it. Now he's going to get, all the, everything he can from NFL evaluators as to whether or not he believes that the right decision is to come back and maybe improve his draft stock and also get some accolades too, because I think he unfortunately was, he got a couple of like PFF and maybe I think AP, maybe you were part of that, gave him the third team nod, but I think he was better than that. So there's also that kind of potential, but it really comes down probably more than anything to the league. What does the league think? Is he a 6th or 7th rounder? Could he improve and become a 3rd rounder in another year? Or is, he can come back, but he's still going to be a 6th or 7th rounder. That's going to be real different. But I think he and Jamari Harris are really important to this. And I think of the upside, Jamari Harris has the most because he didn't played for last year. And then this year he came in after a suspension and he was getting better and better. And, he didn't get any accolades. He's probably a guy that'll be a very, very late draft pick. Maybe he makes it. But I think in some ways, I think of him like Matt Hankins. He comes back and he might have a stellar senior year and then put himself in that draft discussion. So, I have like 4 guys that I'm like, you recruit as hard as you do anybody else. And that's Higgins. Sorry, not Jackson, but Higgins, Castro, Harris, and All. But All I would also say is if Lachey comes back, then you wish him well. But if he's not coming back, then I think you recruit him as hard as you've ever recruited anybody.
Yeah. So I just want to clarify again, because we're throwing a lot of names out there. Were you saying 50-50 on DeJean or Castro?
Castro.
Okay. Yeah. I was talking about DeJean.
I thought you meant Castro.
Yeah. So yeah.
50.
Okay. So what do you think percentage chance DeJean comes back?
15.
Yeah. So there you go. We're on the same page.
Okay. All right.
Yeah.
We're not thinking alike here, but
yeah. Well, yeah. We got a lot going on here. So outside of work, but anyway, I love it. I think that. I've heard Lachey's got a stronger chance to come back maybe than people think, and I think if he comes back, probably All doesn't. I think you're right. I think it's one or the other. I don't want to say one or the other because they both could go, but I think there's a lot of motivation for one to come back, and certainly, again, no offense to anyone else, but Lachey is he's got the scholarship. He would have to give it up in a way, where All would have to they would have to find one for him. And obviously, there was no doubt about Cade McNamara, finding one for him. That's a no-brainer. So a little different category there, but
he's already
so much to talk.
So,
right. So much to talk about, think about here. But if you could get Lachey back with Ostrenga, man, That's pretty appealing for whoever the offensive coordinator is.
Yeah, I think you could run a lot. I think Ostrenga is a guy on a high trajectory. I think Luke Lachey, if the season would have played out and he would have been able to compete, would have been a Mackey finalist. I think, in fact, outside of Brock Bowers, probably would have been, maybe the second best tight end in the country. And next year, he has a chance to become a Mackey Award winner. He's that talented. He's going to get that opportunity. This year, you had 10 catches and barely 2 games and some real pivotal ones. I think he'd be an outstanding guy. If you can lure him back, that's like bringing back a first or second round draft pick at that position. And Eric All, I look at him and I think it's going to be a tough uphill grind for him to get to the NFL because of when the injury took place. It was an ACL. That's not a 6-week, 8-week, 10-week recovery. That is practically a year. Does anybody spend a draft pick on him? They probably would if he was healthy. If he may not even be able to get to training camp healthy. So does people just bypass him for the draft? Would be better for him to improve another year. I mean, those are the questions that I think have to be answered. But if Lachey comes back, or if All comes back to combine with Ostrenga, I think they've got a really good twosome there.
Right. And what's interesting, I wanted to ask about running backs actually, because as you look at your roster breakdown, out of those 84/85, 7 are running backs. Now that's a huge number, and that's assuming Le'Shawn Williams, Caleb Johnson, Jazzy and Patterson all come back, Terrell Washington, Kamari Moulton, and then you got incoming true freshmen Brevin Dahl and Xavier Williams. So 7 running backs. It's hard to imagine 7 get to June, I guess, but it's possible. I guess it's possible right now, right? I mean, that'll be an interesting position, I guess, with the bowl game. How much does each guy play? They can enter till January 2nd, which is the day after the game. I don't know. What are your thoughts on running back?
I'm kind of the same way, thinking, it's great that they're all going to go to the bowl game, but what happens in the bowl game if, let's say, they get 25 carries? And 14 are Williams, 6 are Johnson, and then the rest go to Patterson or something like that. When they get done with the bowl game, do they sit there and go, yeah, I don't know about this? Or once they get done with spring practice, because the one thing is, there's anxiety. We're all attached to the numbers today, but it really doesn't matter until you really get to August. So, when somebody gets out of spring football, is that when they go, yeah, I just don't see it. And then they enter that period, or even in the fall, in the summer, so I would be surprised, Chad, if all 7 are suit up for the Hawkeyes next August and Kids Day. I can see 1, maybe even 2. Yeah. Picking a different option there.
Sure. That's a really good point you made. I'm glad you articulated that, because I think it's important to say is that, yeah, I mean, most of these true freshmen aren't going to be here until June. So you've got time to, for current scholarship guys to weed themselves out of the program. And that's, again, not in a bad way, but they're also at some point, Scott, and maybe we should have this conversation too before we move on, is just at some point if you're Kirk Ferentz or whatever, you may have to have some heart to hearts with guys that are, and I don't know if I want to really throw names out there because it's not fair to the kids, but kind of dead weight in terms of the 85 scholarships, right?
Yeah, you have to. In today's world, Chad, when we're talking about players have more options and opportunities than ever before. I mean, now there's the court case where the portal is wide open again for everybody, no matter if they transferred or not. Now you have to look at all the people on your roster and evaluate if you're a third-year player and you've been hurt or you've been lapped, and there's other players coming in that probably have the opportunity to jump ahead of you to be second. If you haven't hit the depth chart and you're entering year 3, you've got your clock's ticking, and that could be, medical scholarship. And that could be, one of the good things Iowa has always done has been very real with their players and telling them they already know kind of where they stand, but, giving them that nod of, we could probably help you out if you want to go somewhere else. Just telling you exactly where things stand. You are the 8th linebacker right now, and we have others coming in, and we could have other people who are coming back potentially. Do you want it? If you want to continue to fight, we'll support you and you compete, but it might be, if you want to play, it may not come here in this year or ever.
Yeah, great point. And there are certain positions where you can kind of wait till May. A running back is definitely one of them where you don't necessarily need to learn every intricacy of an offense or even maybe even a defense potentially if you're a linebacker or something like that. And, maybe going to go play some special teams and fight for a backup spot at a MAC school or whatever. So there's potential for movement there. The other position I wanted to look at just quickly before we move on is offensive line. I mean, gosh, they only lose Rusty Feth for sure. Probably. I mean, I did ask Kirk about Dejon Parker toward the end of the season. I said, is he possible for medical? And he's like, no, not really. So I don't think he would come back. Probably not in the pecking order. And Nick DeYoung. Same with Nick DeYoung. I mean, you would think it's time to move on for him, probably just because of the numbers you've got.
Yeah.
But even then, you got 18 guys. That's a big number for offensive line right now.
Well, exactly, and part of it is you've got kind of a weird diagram, or something. You've got 4 guys who are going to be seniors, and all of them started games this year. So you're not going to try to push it out, or nudge out Mason Richmond, Connor Colby, Logan Jones, Tyler Ellsbury. Now I could see Ellsbury, just speculating, and he did talk about this a little bit a few weeks ago. Just you start to wonder about your clock and how, if you're going to play or not. But he's been a productive player, so maybe he'd want to stay and compete for a guard spot or maybe center or something. But then you had 4 incoming guys who are true freshmen now, and then you have 4 more incoming guys. And so then you start to look in the middle there, and Jennings Dunker, starter. Bo Stevens was trajectory is there has been a player. Then there are 4 others that I think you got to wonder, just simply numbers game. I mean, that you hate to mention them and throw them out there, but a couple of them have been hurt. One of them is the backup left tackle, and another one isn't on the depth chart. But it's a strange number. It wouldn't surprise me if 1, maybe 2 decides to seek other opportunities based on the situation. Potentially a medical scholarship, I would say, for one of them.
Yeah, right. Good stuff. Well, I mean, again, check out that article. The names it gets you familiarized with the roster, gets you ready for the off season ahead. And it basically has become like Iowa's portal season right now is retaining guys. And if they fail on those guys, then you probably hit the portal more hard. But if you could bring back Lachey, Castro, Higgins, Harris, those would be the 4. If you could bring back those 4, I'm gonna rule out DeJean.
Yeah.
I mean, if you could bring back those 4, they'll find room for them by May, scholarship wise. Sure. I think so.
Yeah, I mean, if we made the numbers what the numbers are, I mean, if they're at 85 as of Wednesday, and then you got to make room for others, and if you could bring back Higgins, Castro, and Harris out of the extra year guys, then you're really only saying we need to make room for 3, and then potentially say, well, maybe we need to get another wide receiver in here, and then there are ways to massage the roster. It's when you start to go, well, there's 85 and then there are 9,
right?
And then you want to add another player or 2 out of the portal, but I know, Chad, a lot of the people have had consternation over, well, they haven't hired an offensive coordinator, and that's keeping them inactive in the portal. It's the numbers that's keeping them inactive in the portal. It's not the OC. If they needed a quarterback, then that would be a huge deterrent, no question. But they seem very secure with Cade McNamara coming back, and then as far as Deacon Hill, Marco Lainez, and James Reeser.
For sure. Good conversation there. Time is running out before Christmas, as we mentioned. Uncle Eddie on his way in his tenement on wheels, so get ready for the holidays. and give our friends at Steeple Ridge Bourbon a try. Steeple Ridge delivers a high-quality, delicious drinking bourbon. If you don't find Steeple Ridge at your favorite retailer, ask for it by name. Steeple Ridge is distilled, aged, and bottled in Iowa by Lonely Oak Distillery. Let's get into some offensive coordinator discussions, Scott. It was funny to see some Scott Frost conversation yesterday. I can definitively say that's not a possibility, but it's silly season, right? So we thought we'd have fun with maybe a question, and it doesn't mean this guy is coming. It doesn't mean anything, but at least it gives us something to jump off of. And we wanted to talk about what would a Paul Chryst offense look like at Iowa, and we can feel free to branch off this as quickly as we want, get on an off ramp and jump down another rabbit hole. But at least let's start there. That is a name, Scott, that at least makes a lot of sense on so many levels, just because there's a relationship there. There's a respect there. You almost, I guess, feel like you would be catching him at a good time in a way if you're Iowa, because it would sound like he was doing a bad job at Wisconsin. It was just a matter of circumstances, right? I mean, and gets fired mid-season last year, so he's available. Obviously, he's helping out Texas right now. So there's a lot of stuff that makes sense, especially in the new Big Ten, where Iowa does need to stand out, but it also needs to do something on offense.
Yeah, no question. That it brings about an interesting point for how Iowa would change. And in what ways would it be more of a adaptation and just kind of shifting, or would it be a legitimate full scale change? And it wouldn't be. When you look at how much they use, like for instance, I went back. This is when they played Wisconsin. How much 11 personnel did they use the previous year versus this year? And I mean, 11 personnel was in the 90% range this year, versus about 35% last year, which is lower than Iowa usually uses it. Would they rely on fullback, or would they get rid of fullback? Would they? And I think they would keep it. Now, how much of it would Kirk want to change things? And I don't know. Chad, what do you think? I mean, what do you think of a Paul Chryst? I mean, I'm in favor of that. I think if that's the outcome, I would be very much. I think that would be a really smart move for Iowa in a lot of range. But what do you think?
Yeah, I looked up a lot of numbers and kind of the history of Paul Chryst just in advance of our conversation today. And it was kind of interesting. And I kind of forgot this too. So I wanted to start here. During COVID, that 2020 offseason, he quietly turned over play calling to Joe Rudolph, who was a trusted assistant offensive coach. And, Chryst to that point had been calling Wisconsin's plays. So I almost put a little line on my sheet of what was Wisconsin's offense like before 2020 and after. And obviously Jonathan Taylor makes a big difference. Yeah. And I think Mel Tucker got the $95 million contract because he had Kenneth Walker for one season, Right. So a really good player does make a difference. So, you would have to kind of separate that, but his offenses in, 2017, 18, 19 were almost exactly what you would want if you're Kirk Ferentz, I think. I mean, they were so let's look at 2019. They were number 38 nationally in total offense, which I don't think there's any, you don't have to even get that high, probably.
No.
But that's a great starting point. And Wisconsin did with, you would have to say, similar personnel. It's not like Alex Hornibrook was amazing. That was his year, right? Or was that Jack Cohen's year? Was that the Jack Cohen year?
That was Jack Cohen. 18 was Hornibrook. And
okay. Yeah, and that's nothing special.
He was the one that had one comeback against Iowa. That was really about it.
Yeah, right. Yeah, in 18. So they averaged 433.2 yards per game in 19, 6.3 per play, which is, those are numbers you would kill for if you're Iowa. 5.33 per carry. 2018, 36 nationally in offense, 431 a game offensively. I mean, like consistent numbers. 6.4 per play as an offense, 6.22 per carry in 2018.
Yeah.
I mean, you're not probably going to get to that level, but God, I mean, you could even, if you could just get to like 4.8, if you're Iowa, is like,
Oh yeah,
a gold standard almost. So,
right.
I mean, the history is there. Everything I've, researched on him is just a really sophisticated run game type of coordinator and play caller. You think about Wisconsin and they don't do under him, and they didn't do like anything crazy, but it was very intricate. And I think that would be a selling point to Iowa as well, where it looks simple, but it's not. So I kind of like all that on many levels, and I like his age, late 50s. This isn't a guy coming in to, make or break his career. I think there's a lot to like if that is the outcome here.
Agreed. I think his, complementary football, that's what they played, because they were outstanding on defense for a long time. With a lot of different defensive coordinators. Dave Aranda was the one who brought the 3-4, and they stuck with it when Paul Chryst got hired and replaced Gary Anderson. And whether it was Jim Leonard or whomever, they stuck with it, and it was tremendous. And you look at, points per game, even in that era, they were almost 34 in 17, plus 34 in 19. And that was the year they beat Iowa 24-22. And that was run based. They had some decent offensive linemen and they had some decent receivers, but Jack Cohen was a nice quarterback, but that's all doable at Iowa. And to elevate the running game, but a lot of it was their passing game was crisper. It had good routes, and they weren't great receivers. They were good receivers. Quintez Cephas was pretty good, the year he came back after his trial. But other than that, I think if he could call the plays and worry about the offense's execution and be a part of recruiting only from the big picture perspective, I'm not advocating for him to be head coach. But I think as an offensive coordinator, designing plays, smart plays, as you well articulated there, was just when he was the one calling plays. I think they would be in great hands if that was the case.
Yeah, and so his buyout, I guess I don't think it's not like you would have to like overpay. I don't think to get him either. He took a reduced buyout from Wisconsin. It was supposed to be $20 million. He took 11, and it was a little bit murky in terms of, but it was like agreed upon. So I kind of, from what I was reading, obviously, we're not Paul Chryst beat writers here, but from what I gathered, it was probably a situation where, if you do get hired, then you just keep that 11 million, whatever, instead of. So I think he wants to work again. Obviously, he's doing it now at Texas. He's got some life left in him. Certainly there's, if John Budmeyer stays on staff, there's a familiarity there, even if he remains an analyst. His nephew is on staff at Iowa as an analyst. I mean, that's I would think at least a selling point on his side of things, assuming that his nephew has had a good experience at Iowa. So there's a lot to like there. So anyway, I think, and I think the factor I wanted to discuss with you, because you've actually written a lot. I mean, you've written a lot about Wisconsin-Iowa rivalry and stuff like that, is with Wisconsin kind of veering its own way under Luke Fickell, Phil Longo, into more of an air raid offense. Could Iowa sort of become that Wisconsin-ish outlier in the new Big Ten? That's kind of where my thought process is from a Kirk Ferentz CEO type of thing. He's, I don't think he ever wants to go to like the air raid type thing. So could he, now that Wisconsin's almost getting out of its own way in that lane, could Iowa become that in the new Big Ten? That's kind of where my thought is.
Somebody's going to fill that vacuum, and Iowa has pretty much for the last couple of years anyway. I mean, they've won 2 out of the 3 West Division titles. They beat Wisconsin 3 out of the last 4 years. So they have kind of filled that vacuum anyway. And if you double down on it, but you have a smart passing system to go along with that, and good coaching and good quarterback play. absolutely they could fill it, and absolutely they could be that team that continues on this run. I mean, they won 10 games 2 years ago. They won 10 games this year, just because they're going to play a little bit more frequently in the East. But next year they don't play Michigan, they don't play Penn State. They play Ohio State. But the schedule may be more challenging. But you know, playing Washington at home, that's not an impossible task for Iowa. So can they get more out of their running game, be sharper, as you very much described well, and can they get a better passing concept? If they can, this offense can take to a different level. And if the defense maintains its high standards, this could be a very high level program, nationally, not just in the Big Ten, but be competitive for the second spot in the Big Ten championship game, regardless of divisional play. I really like that idea with Paul Chryst as that position. And the other part is it would be a seamless transition, because he would coach quarterbacks to go along with being the OC and calling plays.
Yeah, I like that aspect of it too, that he is a quarterback's coach, a real one as offensive coordinator. That would help for sure. And yeah, we're talking about, the playoff era now. You don't have to win the Big Ten. You just have to be like the third or fourth best team in the Big Ten. And, give me a 2018 or 2019 Wisconsin against a UCLA or Washington, or even an Oregon. I mean, I'll take my chances there, especially the way this Iowa defense has elevated. And it sounds like, Iowa's willing to pay Phil Parker, Seth Wallace to stay. I mean, I think that's the goal anyway. So if you can just keep that defense rolling at a very, very high level, you don't need a huge overhaul on offense. You just need better offense.
Yeah. Well, the last 3 years have been a wasteland. We know it. It's been the worst we've ever seen, and the worst in college football history. And I'm not even being hyperbolic. I think we all agree that it's been as horrific as it gets. But when you look back, not that long ago, and back in the late teens, when you had if you have Luke Lachey and Addison Ostrenga, it's not a stretch to think that, or Eric Hall even, it's not a stretch to think that your production at tight end can't be similar to what you had with Hawkinson and Fant. And if we remember, the way Iowa's defense has improved and taken strides is because they switched to a cash, because they were trying to combat what Paul Chryst did in a 3 wide receiver set. I mean, that's how they beat Iowa, and that's what prompted Phil Parker to say, we got to do this full time. And Iowa's defense has never been better for a longer period of time than what it's been now. That's under Norm, that's under Bill Brazier, and everything. It's better now than it ever has been. And the reason why was to combat Paul Chryst's offense. So it all kind of comes back, and you think about it, that if Paul Chryst can manage the offense, take it to a direction, and they could have the personnel run it, which they should, then Iowa's a very, very healthy place as a program.
Absolutely. And then the last part of this, if it is him, I mean, we're not saying that at all. We're just kind of having the conversation here. I feel like Kirk could really comfortably hand over. I mean, maybe he doesn't want to, but let it go a little bit offensively. Say, okay, you have the keys now, 100%. He understands ball control. He doesn't have to preach it into his head like you're not turning it over.
You're right.
He doesn't have to tell somebody like Paul Chryst that. He knows that. He did that. That's not – it's just boom. You understand that? Go do your thing. I'm going to hang out here with the offensive line anyway. And, I think it could breathe some life into Kirk too, that last whatever he's got left, 5 years, 3 years, 7 years, whatever. I think I just like the feel of it. I'm not saying it's going to happen, but it's just it's a sensible transition to me.
Yeah, no question, because Kirk, I think, has demonstrated, and maybe I'm going to get some arrows from some viewers or listeners, but I think Kirk has demonstrated his aptitude as a head coach more in the last 3 to 4 years than he ever has in his entire career. I mean, he had to turn it around 25 years ago. He did. He had to maintain it through ebbs and flows, and he did. But I think what transpired in 2020 and how he's handled the adversity then, how he handled the adversity this year, has never been better. And the fact that they still continue to have the lowest numbers, or among the lowest numbers in the transfer portal, shows that the culture is very strong. But the offense needs a revamp. And I think once they go through with that, and they have somebody like Paul Chryst come in, that I think it could go to a higher plane than it ever has been before. Excuse me.
I keep coming up with new points, but the last thing is just like, if you are Paul Chryst, I mean, the way college football is changing, there aren't necessarily a lot of natural homes for you anyway with what your expertise is. So Iowa just fits from his side of things too, I feel like. So again, I've never covered Paul Chryst other than at Big Ten Media Days, asking him a question or two, but I think I asked him about Bud Meyer a couple of years ago. Probably the last time I talked to him. And so anyway, fun conversation. Any other offensive coordinator thoughts? We just talked about one guy there, but anything else on your mind as we kind of monitor things from our seats?
Well, to give full credit to one of our friends and colleagues, Tom Kakert, he listed 3 that, and those names have been bantied about, and the other 2, Andy Ludwig and Joe Philbin. I think Joe Philbin would provide similar type of strength to the Iowa program. I mean, people think, oh, he's just trying to get the band back together again. That would not be the case with Joe Philbin. I mean, he has been an NFL head coach. He's been an offensive coordinator for a long time. And then people, well, he didn't call plays. Yeah, I'm not going to get too hung up on that part of it. He did a little bit, but he's also with Aaron Rodgers and Brett Favre even, and I think both of them are more than capable of changing the play at the line of scrimmage and performing well doing it. So to have confidence, for those people to have confidence in him, I think he would be still a very solid hire, and he understands Kirk too. He's been here, and he could bring in some NFL ideas but he's also well versed enough, because he's an analyst now at Ohio State, to understand the college game, that you can't just have a playbook the size of one of my manila folder, my 3-ring binders back here of all these things. And the other one, Andy Ludwig, I think that I would be very surprised with that. I mean, you're talking about a guy who's making more than Phil Parker right now currently. He's run a terrific offense at Utah. He's from Utah. His son played at Iowa for 3 years. Joe Ludwig was a backup fullback for 3 years. He was offensive coordinator at Wisconsin before Paul got there. And then I think he came back for a short period of time. I think to pry him away from Utah might be a little challenging, but worth the conversation. But I think if you're ranking probability with potential, I think either Philbin or Chryst would be, if not home run hires, they're certainly getting runners to the plate and scoring runs.
Yeah, my preference would definitely be Chryst on those 2. Ludwig, like you said, kind of a long shot, but that would be another good fit because they use their tight ends really well, know how to use them, make the most out of their offense, rely on a good defense, all about stability at Utah. There'd be a lot of seamless transitions there. Plus, he knows the Pac-12, and you got 4 new opponents coming in from that, and you're playing 2 of them next year, and another one the next year, and another one the next year. So,
right.
So there's a little bit of, that's a little bonus, I guess, there. And I guess today's message board name is Clint Kubiak of the 49ers. So, I'm sure that's, fodder, for people to chew on, but I'm not thinking that's a possibility.
No, that's the path that you've got to caution yourself against. Mm-hmm. I mean, because now Clint Kubiak is the son of Gary Kubiak, who's been a longtime NFL offensive coordinator and head coach. He's worked for Kyle Shanahan, so that the verbiage is going to be like 15 German words in a row, which will stretch from one end of the building to the other. And he's got a great mind for it. We've heard good things about him, but coming to Iowa, is that a good move for him? And how much would Kirk say, we can't do it that way here. It doesn't work here. We can't do this. And that's why I think, if you're talking about head coaching possibilities, or you bring in Kirk retires and an offensive coordinator for a different one, yeah, maybe. But I think this is the area where we're getting a little ahead of ourselves. It's Kirk Ferentz we're talking about here,
right?
And the offensive coordinator has not really been a heavy recruiting guy anyway. Maybe a little bit of an area here or there. So I think for somebody like Paul Chryst, that'd be perfect. And if he can fix Iowa's offense, if he wants to be a head coach again in the future, what a perfect opportunity. He took the Canyon-esque offense in the world and took him to the college football playoff, and they won a game. Something like that. And they averaged 32 points a game doing it. I mean, that's, there's your resume right there.
Exactly. Yeah. Well put. We got a couple minutes left, maybe. I mean, we kind of went long there, but it was fun. Do you want to talk about Caitlin Clark or the Iowa men? I'll give you the choice.
I kind of think the men are an important topic right now, Chad.
All right.
They lost 3 straight games by double figures. They hadn't done that in 4+ years. You saw him in person in Ames. I saw him in person against Michigan. I think it's kind of rudderless right now in a lot of ways on the floor. I think they've got some good pieces, but I don't think they're playing well together. I don't think there's a lot of great chemistry right now. And they have a real critical couple of weeks just to get something back on the right track, or it could be a season completely off the rails like we saw maybe in 2017-ish area, where I think maybe it was 18 when they had.
It was 17, 18, yeah.
Yeah. So I don't know. Am I casting too dark of an episode here, or are you in a similar vein as I right now?
Yeah, I'm. I thought this team would be better, and I'm not putting them in the grave just yet. But I also now realize, man, when you had Keegan Murray a couple years ago and Chris Murray last year, like that's a big difference than what is going on now. I mean, Ben Krikke, nice player, but he's not Chris Murray. Peyton Sandfort still has not hit that level that I thought maybe he would be at now. No, he could catch fire and be great in Big Ten play. He was, he kind of caught fire about this time, a little later, about January 1st or whatever last year is kind of when he started getting going. Actually, it was after the first. So anyway, right after the first. And then, Patrick McCaffrey, he's clearly dealing with something, and you feel for him, and hopefully he gets back on track personally and on the court soon. Obviously, we're all rooting for that for him. I know it's been, that's a tough situation for him. So it's just a lot going on right now. Tony Perkins' grandmother, passing away, someone he's very close to. We can all relate to that, where your just emotions aren't the same, when you got stuff going on away from work or your profession or whatever. So, but I'm just not confident that they're going to get it back like they did last year because they don't have a Chris Murray. I mean, Chris Murray was hurt last year during that bad stretch. They've got everybody is playing right now, and there's not answers.
I think they miss Connor McCaffrey because he's been the glue piece for 6+ years on the floor because he's the tough guy and tough in all the right ways. Chris Murray was a first-round draft pick. And you just don't replicate that. And, it's funny, we've been spoiled a little bit as of late with Chris and Keegan. But you got to go all the way back to Ricky Davis before Keegan, who was a first-round draft pick. And when they had Luka and stuff. And I think they've got a lot of pieces. And I think the pieces are okay. But I'm not sure that they're cohesive. And defensively, they're every bit as terrible as they've been. I mean, the last 3 games, they've averaged, they've given up, 89 points a game on average, 90 plus twice. They appeared to me, you were there, to be really non-competitive in Ames. And that happens. It's a great environment, and it's a good team, and it's going to get better. And I would probably buy stock in Iowa State right now. But, so I didn't expect them to win there, but I expected them to compete. And I didn't even think they competed. And against Michigan, that is not a good Michigan team. That is a team that's having as much turmoil as any team in the country right now. And in the second half, it was like, what's going on? And unfortunately, I thought Fran's ejection was, dare I say, a little bit selfish. I mean, the technical was one thing. That was, I understand arguing that call. That was, you got to charge up your team. But getting kicked out with a young team that could really use some leadership at that point in that game, and they weren't totally out of it. And but to leave the court, and, you leave it up to your guy. I thought that he needed to be better than that. So I'm just not sold that they get the mojo back. I think there's a lot of teams that are a little bit better than they are in the Big Ten. They can win some games and they'll beat a team or two that they shouldn't beat. But 6 or 7 wins to me is right now the ceiling I have them on the Big Ten, even in a non-good Big Ten season.
Yeah, well, it'll be interesting to find out. They get 3 games here: Florida A&M, UMBC, Northern Illinois to kind of get right over the next 3 weeks, and then it's at Wisconsin, so probably going to 0-3 in Big Ten play after that. Then they get some opportunities: home against Rutgers, home against Nebraska, at Minnesota, home against Purdue, home against Maryland. That's at least a 5-game stretch where maybe you can get your season back on track. So I would say after that stretch, we'll kind of have a better idea where this team is. But I'm with you. My expectations have dialed back quite a bit on this team, just mostly because of that Michigan game. I didn't expect much at Purdue. Terrible circumstances because you're facing a team that just got upset in that place you never play well. And Iowa State, that environment was terrific, and the freshmen just looked overwhelmed in that game, and everyone else did too.
Yeah. So
not just them, but at home, didn't expect them to just get blown out by a very, very mediocre Michigan team. So,
I expected a 20-point loss at Purdue because that's just what happens. Even when they're good, they get blown out there. I expected 10-12 in Ames. I thought they're still going to lose, but I just wanted to see fight. I wanted to see competitiveness. I wanted to see, you're down 8, you're down 10. We know how ravenous that place is. It is nuts. So the Iowa State fans listening, yes, give yourself a round of applause. That place is difficult to win. But I wanted to see, okay, they're still battling. I did not see that at all. And then the Michigan game in the second half was as poorly played of a game as I've seen in a while from Iowa basketball.
Be an interesting dynamic, Scott. Fran McCaffrey is not very far from Tom Davis's win record, but it's going to be like, if they go 12-19 or something like that, and he gets the record, like in late February. I mean, how anticlimactic would it be? Not saying that's going to happen, but we're kind of getting down that path where it could. They're 5-5 right now. So to get to 12, you got to win 7 Big Ten. Well, no, you got to win 4 Big Ten games probably. So I guess they'll probably get there.
Yeah,
but still,
it still might be February.
Yeah, maybe. Anyway, good show, man.
Yeah. Well, thanks for having me on.
All right. Well, for Scott Dochterman, this is Chad Leistikow. Thanks for tuning in to Legends and Listeners from the Channel Seed Studios, and we will talk to you next week here on the Iowa Everywhere Network.